It's amazing to me, the idea, the concept that we're talking about, things that the parents are doing that are affecting the way the child's brain is being developed and long-term effects of that. That is. Welcome back, guys, to Cases and Cocktails. This is episode 18 today, and with me today, as always, my beautiful wife, Janice. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And today with us, we have Dr. Mary Alvarez. Dr. Alvarez, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Good. We're excited to have you here today. Parental Alienation Awareness Month is in April, and that's where we're at now. And we're going to have a little conversation about PA and your role and kind of what you do inside the realm of parental alienation. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Before we get started, Cases of Cocktails, we always have a cocktail. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Cool. Jay, what we got?
Today, Fernanda did a ranch water, so it's just tequila, topo, and some lime.
Fantastic. Y'all want to try it? See how that goes. All right. Here we go. There you go. Cheers. There we go. Dr. Alvarez, do you like tequila?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I do.
All right,
this
good.
is Texas.
You have to. Right?
I'm a big fan of tequila. My beautiful wife, she's a bourbon fan, but I enjoy tequila, so that's fantastic. I'm glad you like it. First of all, it's Dr. Alvarez, so I appreciate that. And if I screw that up, you can yell at me, okay?
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that we get that right. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a licensed psychologist here in Texas.
Okay.
I'm new to the Austin area. I've been here about 3.5 years.
Okay.
Prior to that, I practiced in the Houston area
Okay.
for about 15 years.
I'm not going to hold that against you for being
thank you.
from Houston.
Hey, love it here.
I was going to say, we have team members that are in Houston. We're fully remote, so I've got team members that are in Houston, that sort of stuff. I give them a hard time all the time. So
the ones that take care of you are from Houston.
I was going to say, most of my personal team is from Houston, so that's fair. What brought you here to Austin?
My youngest graduated.
Okay.
And it was at UT Austin, and I love the hill country, and I was very, very tired of hurricanes. And
That's
so
fair.
there was just several reasons brought me over this way.
Well, that's
I told you we could follow the kids around to college.
Oh,
See?
no,
Yes.
we're not doing, we've got a while to talk about that still. I'm telling you, Jesus. I don't want to be a nomad anyway.
It's okay.
All right, well, you're here now.
Yes.
It's fantastic. And generally kind of as a psychiatrist, right?
Psychologist.
Psychologist, I'm so sorry. And as a psychologist, generally what type of cases are you dealing with? What kind of patients?
So I practice forensic psychology, specifically family law. I've been doing that for 15, 16 years now exclusively.
Now, how did you get into that?
So I got into it over in Brazoria County, which is
Okay.
contiguous to one of the counties of Houston.
Yeah.
And a judge just took a chance on me, saw something in me, and started appointing custody evaluations to me. So I had to learn very quickly what that meant, how to do this, what the family code was. I had to learn all of that.
Yeah.
And that's how I got started in the
awesome.
forensic world, but that's also how I got started in parental alienation.
Tell me, you've been doing that for 15 years. You enjoy it. I mean, you haven't given it up, right?
I haven't. It's a passion of mine. It's stressful, but it's rewarding.
What makes you so passionate about it?
Because I know the science and research and the damage to children and the long-term outcome studies, which are pretty sobering. And so it's a passion to try and prevent that in children as much as I can with my role.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's
I
great.
want to say, that's exactly what we want to talk about today. Before we came on today, we were kind of discussing the topics, and we got down to a topic, and there's a little name for it. It's called ACEs, right? What does it stand for?
Adverse childhood experiences.
And that's exactly what we got to that space. I was like, that's exactly what we should talk about today, right? Is that because we often talk about the parents, and we talk particularly to you guys about how to navigate these things and deal with this stuff. But I really want to focus today, if we can, on how high conflict custody cases. It's not just PA. It is Parental Alienation Month, and we want to talk about that. But it's not just PA. It's also high conflict cases and behaviors, right, that parents exhibit that can affect children in their development. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right. I got to ask, you said science and research and all this. Where are you getting that information?
So the last 20, 25 years, the scientific foundation for parental alienation has just exploded. And I mean, the science and research is there. The
Right.
field is well respected and well grounded in scientific principles and methodology, and it's there to use now. It's
Yeah.
there to use in the judicial system, in psychology, in intervention.
Are you seeing mainly parents, kiddos, parents and kiddos together? What is your typical role?
So right now, I moved from custody evaluations and retired from those
Right.
several years ago.
Thank goodness, too.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, they're pretty.
They're difficult.
They're difficult.
Yeah.
So I moved into a lot of parent work, a lot of parent facilitation work, and so I'm working with target parents and favored parents
Okay.
in these high conflict situations, and they don't always involve alienation, but the dynamics are very, very troublesome.
Troublesome. And
for the
troublesome
kids.
for the kiddos.
For the
right?
kids.
For the kiddos. That's
Yes.
exactly right. We've talked previously on the podcast. We've also just in litigation. We talk a lot of times about psychological maltreatment, right? And I use this word a lot, particularly in presentations. And I think it's not fully understood. If that makes sense. And I'm not talking about psychological maltreatment from one parent to another parent. I'm talking about psychological maltreatment of a parent towards a child. Right? And how that affects the child. How do you understand what that means? What do you understand it to mean, I guess is a better question.
So we can talk about psychological maltreatment, which has certain definitions and certain ways to describe it, or I tend to focus more on the ACEs, which is just another way to describe, the maltreatment of children.
Right.
Under the adverse childhood experiences, but it's parental behavior and or circumstances in the environment that contribute to risk factors
Right.
for the children as they grow older. And the more risk factors they have in childhood, the poorer the outcomes in adulthood, both physically and psychologically.
What about let's break that down just a little bit. Let's do behaviors first. You want to? Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit, when you talk about behaviors that create those risks, what kind of behaviors are you talking about?
So let's maybe talk about it in terms of parental alienation behaviors and non-parental alienation
Perfect,
behaviors. So let's start with the non. Just conflict between parents alone is an ACE.
Right.
So there's 10 categories of ACEs, and one of the categories of ACEs that puts you at a higher risk as an adult is just a divorce in your family.
Just a divorce.
Just a
divorce, yeah.
And is that regardless of whether or not the child is spoken to about inappropriate topics or hears the infighting?
Exactly. It's just a divorce. So even divorces that are not high conflict and very, very grueling in the legal system, that is an ACE. So children leave with one ACE if their parents have divorced and it was just a straightforward divorce.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not I would assume that a lot of children have ACEs in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about having one and so, all the sky's falling, right? This is a totality of all of them. You said there's 10, right?
There's 10, and it's exponential. So the more ACEs that you have, the higher your risk factors for physical consequences and psychological consequences.
And so the first one, sort of just the divorce itself.
Just the divorce itself.
These are the non-parental alienation behaviors.
That's correct.
And so we have just the divorce itself. What else?
So some of the categories that would clearly fall under parental alienation are psychological abuse.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
For those that don't understand it, what are some examples of psychological abuse?
Okay, so psychological abuse, and let's frame it under parental alienation.
Of course.
When a parent tries to interrupt the relationship between the child and the other parent through, the various tactics that we define parental alienation behaviors as, that's psychological abuse. Children are not hardwired to reject a parent.
Right.
It is just not in our DNA. It's in our DNA to attach to our caregivers so that we have the highest likelihood of survival.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basics, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you are a parent who's trying to disrupt that relationship with a primary caregiver, that goes against our biology, and that is emotional or psychological abuse. So when you denigrate
Right.
the parent, the other parent to the child, when you try and put that child in a loyalty conflict, you have to choose one of us.
Right.
You know, when you make that child afraid
Right.
of that other parent. I mean, those are all psychologically damaging behaviors that potentially will have consequences.
And then when you see those behaviors, right? So your role as let's just use your role as a PF, right, as a parent facilitator. So you're touching both the targeted parent and the favored parent. When you start to see that, obviously you're doing the thing where you check the box, right, over there while it's going on. But how do you address that with both parents, both the targeted parent and the favored parent?
So the way that I tackle that is because, parent facilitation is about getting agreements,
Right.
between the parents. So I will use a combination of co-parenting and parallel parenting. And so I'll have parallel parenting conversations with each parent individually, and try and that's where because it's a different approach. If
Yeah.
I'm working with a target parent, I am making different conversations than if I'm working with a favored parent.
Yeah.
It's very different work.
Yeah.
Because
it has to be, right? It has to
they
be
have two different objectives.
Right.
I want to take a step back too. Can you explain to us a little bit what you do in your role as a parent facilitator?
Oh, that's a good question too. Yeah.
So the primary role is to help parents reduce conflict, okay? Because we know that conflict hurts children. And so I'm trying to create an environment to reach some agreements on some basic parenting behavior, communication, how to use, our family wizard, when to text,
Right.
when to call. I mean, you have to break it down into measurable behaviors for them. And so communication, following the order as it's written, even though the order is supposed to be followed, you find parents deviate from that. And so
Right.
constantly reinforcing the order and getting parents, to follow the order and be in agreement about that. If there's not in the order, it doesn't identify phone calls, for
Right.
example, how to maintain contact with the child when you're not with the child. So that is another, area where I try and get parents to agree.
And you're just working with them and trying to say, hey, look, this is what parent A wants and this is what parent B wants.
Exactly.
And sort of how can we get to a space where you can both sort of navigate this and not for the sake of the parents, but for the sake of the kid, right? Or the children, right?
It's all for what will best help the child.
Right.
And I do a lot of education
Yeah.
along the way with the parents. I talk about ACEs with the parents. I introduce them to the basics of the science and research of the outcome studies,
Yeah.
which are very discouraging.
It's got to be impactful when you put that type of science in front of a parent and say, look, here are the things that you are adding to the list that are going to potentially negatively impact your child's adult life, but the outcome of who they are. Do you feel like when you explain it to them that does work, that they hear you at that point?
The target parent, yes. The favored parent, not so much.
Okay.
And so that's a challenge. They have a different narrative.
Right.
And
How do you handle that?
Yeah, I was going to say.
So then what do we do?
We're going to put you right on the spot, right? So fix it. All right, go ahead.
There's no one solution. It's repetition.
Yeah.
It's trying to create a space for a favored parent to save face. That's a very big concept. If they feel boxed in, cornered, then they're going to come out, very defensive and uncooperative. So I always try and create a way for them to save face and buy into it in a way that, doesn't create additional conflict and defensiveness.
Right.
I mean, it's a dance.
Oh,
As a parenting professional.
Yeah. It's a fine line. I mean, it's high conflict. So you're in the middle of high conflict, and it doesn't matter whether it's
Pivot.
right. It doesn't matter whether it's parents or a street fight. It's a dance, right? And you got to figure it out. So let me. You said the science, and you talk about showing it to the parents and that sort of stuff. What does the science say?
So what the science says. Okay, let's start with some of the psychological effects, and then I'll go into some of the neurological effects.
Yeah.
So high conflict, so there's two bodies of science. There's high conflict, there's a body of research just related to high conflict, and then there's a body of research that's related to parental alienation specifically, okay? And there's a lot of overlap, but the children from high conflict families have increased likelihoods of all of the major psychopathologies, depression, anxiety, personality disorders, which are hugely problematic as an adult.
Right.
Makes life really tough if you have a personality disorder.
Right.
Okay. If you're speaking about alienation, I mean, then you've got not only what I described, but likely outcomes of even more severe pathology, suicidal ideation, addictions. You know, people who turn to substances to just numb themselves.
From being in the middle of all of it.
Absolutely. Grief and loss is huge because they lost a relationship.
I was going to say they
lost a
didn't- right,
parent.
they didn't lose a parent, sort of
To death.
To death, right? But you lost a parent because you don't have that relationship.
You lost that relationship. So there's a lot of grief and loss work, with these now adults.
Yeah.
Neurologically,
Yeah.
the research shows that there are essentially across the board processing deficits in cognitive ways. So that could be processing speed, it could be frontal lobe processing, which are your higher level cognitive skills, visual perceptual, language processing. It's just pretty pervasive in the brain. But what's really sobering is there's actually research that shows structural changes in the brain.
In the brain.
In the brain of children who come from high conflict and or parental alienation backgrounds.
Is it so? You're talking about a physiological change. Obviously, you're talking about sort of a psychological issue. I don't mean to refer. I'm not trying to say that's not important or minimize it, but it's a psychological issue, right? The child's in the middle of this high conflict or parental alienation, but you're saying that the science says that it creates a physiological change in the structure of the child's
structure. That's
brain.
right. Because what happens is under conditions of constant parent conflict and strife, the child's autonomic nervous system, which regulates our fight or flight response, malfunctions. It stays in the on position.
Okay.
And so these children's brains are constantly being bathed with the neurochemicals that are only designed for short-term use. If you need a car's bearing down on you in a parking lot and you need a quick surge of adrenaline to jump out of the way, then our brains are designed to return to baseline, threat's over, car is sped off, we're all good. But in these families, the threat never leaves, right?
So they're always in a state of emergency.
Yes, and the adrenaline, the cortisol, norepinephrine just continue to be released by the brain in a brain that's not designed for that. And that's what creates the toxic stress, and that's what factors into structural changes in the brain.
Does it matter the age of the kiddo as far as they're developed, or is this just across the board?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I would have to look at the research to really see the developmental effects.
Right.
I would say in general, just to be able to give you something, the brain changes very, very rapidly in young children, and as they age, it's refining itself, and the changes are less dramatic.
Right.
So, I mean,
you would imagine then, as they get older, it's amazing to me the idea, the concept that we're talking about, things that the parents are doing that are affecting the way the child's brain is being developed and long-term effects of that. That is, that's just something that I don't think a lot of people, I know myself, have not put a lot of thought to that, but I can see where a lot of other people haven't done that either. And particularly when we talk about litigating these cases and the effect.
And I think it's having that information is a really useful tool to be able to talk to clients about it.
Right.
Like, look, I get what you're trying to do here. I get that, you're trying to strategize or you're trying to position yourself for optics, but you have to stop.
Right.
Not just because it's not going to work and it's bad for your relationship with the kiddo, but you're actually hurting your child.
Yeah. Yeah. It's shocking to me. Tell me, when this is going on, what kind of interventions are there? What are we doing to stop it? Do you have that intervention tool, or what do you do?
I mean, quite simply, you have to reduce the conflict. You have to take the stimuli out of the environment that is creating the toxic stress, and that's that parent conflict, that chronic parent conflict.
And so that's where you come in then to try to help minimize that. Are you court appointed to cases? Are you available for people to hire you privately? If the attorneys sit down and say, hey, this is something our clients want, pick up the phone. Are you available to do that?
I am almost always court appointed
Okay.
and like to be
Right.
court appointed,
Right.
so that I've got the judiciary's backing.
Right. Well, and you get buy-in that way from both, right? Oftentimes, the targeted parent will say, "Hey, I want to use so and so," and you're
Right.
just back to the same. You're back to the same conflict that you're trying to solve, right? So, that's fantastic. Do you, when you're court appointed and stuff, how do you approach those initial conversations with the parents?
So my process is to spend 2 hours with each parent individually, so a total of 4 hours to really understand several things: the enough of the history, the relevant history,
Right.
and the parenting dynamics.
Okay. Yeah.
I need to understand,
What's
what
going
has or hasn't worked for you people. How did you get here? I mean, how are you unable to solve your conflict up to this point without a bunch of attorneys and a judge and professionals being appointed?
Right. Right.
So that's really, really important. So that's how I come out of the gate. I get 4 hours worth of.
How long do you typically ride along with these parents as a parent facilitator?
Almost always the duration of the court case.
Okay.
I'll tell you one thing that kind of blows it up for me is if I'm called to testify
Right,
and I do have an opinion by that point. I
Right.
can't opine about custody or possession, but I've got an opinion about parenting.
Right.
Then somebody's unhappy.
Right. Right.
And then it's not really going to work after
Yeah,
that.
then
Right.
Somebody doesn't want
Yeah.
to continue, and really it's kind of tarnished my ability to be effective. So
Right.
that's.
Do you think that there's a better way for the attorneys or the courts to see what's going on without bringing you into the middle of it?
Not necessarily. I mean, because sometimes the information, the judge really does need to hear this.
Right. Right.
To make decisions to potentially change the trajectory. So I guess it's just a hazard of, my role.
Right. I want to ask real fast too. You talk about when they come in, you spend time with both of them. And in a previous podcasts, we've talked about this dynamic, this power dynamic that's created oftentimes, where you have a favored parent and you have a targeted parent, and out of precaution or caution, the targeted parent has limited access or possession of the child, and now that child is sort of elevated above that parent, right? Do you see that? Do you
Yes.
see them? Two, how the hell do you navigate it, right? Because
Yeah.
it's in previous talks we've talked about how you're removing the favorite or the targeted parent's autonomy or ability to be a parent, right? Authority, right? Agency, and in doing that as a parent facilitator, how do you navigate that?
I know it's a very big challenge. I have open conversations with both parents about entitled children, and look at what you're inadvertently producing. What does entitlement look like as an adult? I mean, I approach it educationally that way.
Right. You come to them and say, "Hey, look, this is the dynamic I'm seeing."
That's right.
I can only imagine that gets a lot of dismissal from the favored parent.
That's right. Absolutely.
I mean, because
They don't believe it.
Well, but more importantly, even if they believe it or not, they're in power. Why are you giving up the power? Right? Why would you do that? In regards to the kiddos, I want to go back to the kiddos and talk about that. Do you get to interact with them at all?
Sometimes the orders are written where I am allowed to interact with the kids. I do like to do that because even though I'm not working with them individually in any kind of therapeutic way, they are the focus of everything that I do. And it's very helpful to hear from the kids.
Right. That way probably what's really going on.
Yeah,
right?
to hear their voice.
And hear what they have to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you, when you have an opportunity to talk to those kiddos and that sort of stuff, do you try to give them any advice or help them in any way?
No.
You're just there to kind of observe and get that information so you can go back to the parent.
So what I tell them is I say, hey, I'm the person who's working with mom and dad. I'm trying to create a different path for your parents. What would be helpful to you? If I could do anything for you guys to make things easier in your life, what would that
That's
look
interesting.
Yeah.
So that's the approach I take.
Yeah. Are they receptive to
Yes.
that?
They don't want this conflict. They don't want the life that they're living.
Yeah. Right.
So, yes.
Once you've got the totality of the ACEs, right? You've gone through and you've got that. Is that an assessment? Is that a report? Do you go back to the attorneys at any point and say, hey, here's kind of where my opinion on, again, not on conservatorship, not on possession access, but more just in the parenting.
I don't take it back to the attorneys. I just use it internally with me.
Okay.
I have to be very careful and stay in my lane and not open myself up to
that,
scrutiny and making somebody unhappy. But
Yeah.
it's just my internal working model. So I know how bad it really is in a family. You know, if I can say, oh, they've got, 3 or 4 ACEs versus 1 or 2.
Right, yeah. I think it's very important. I think it's very important that parents have the ability to do this, but they learn what the effects of their conflict is going to do to their children. I think that's fantastic. If people wanted to get a hold of you to get you appointed or do those things, how would they go about doing that?
I have a website.
What is that?
drmaryalvarez.com.
drmaryalvarez.com. And you're willing to go back to Houston and do work down there or no?
I love it here. I am not willing to.
She said you go to Houston.
Yeah, she said that's fair. I don't blame her. I don't blame her at all. I'm not really keen on that either. I want to tell you thank you. I want to tell you thank you for coming and sharing with us today. It's greatly it's been a great pleasure to have you, but more importantly, the information you provide is fantastic. It's absolutely
That was a
fantastic.
lot of good information, some of which I haven't heard before.
Right. So,
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate that.
Of course. Guys, that is going to be episode 18 today here at Cases and Cocktail. Thank you for riding along with us, and thank you for being here with us and Dr. Mary Alvarez. As always, look forward for more content, particularly this month here in April, as we continue to put out some content regarding Parental Alienation Awareness Month. With that being said, you good?
I'm good. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next Friday.
Thanks, guys.